Up. A short word that's a tall order. Up your game. Up the ante. And if you stumble, you get back up. Up isn't easy, and we ought to know. We're in the business of up. Every day, Delta flies 250,000 people while investing billions improving everything from booking to baggage claim. We're raising the bar on flying, and tomorrow, we will up it yet again.
I think if you go beyond that image, if you go beyond some of the challenges, you will see that you've got Lagos, for instance, which if it were a state would be the 15th largest nation in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, you have areas where people are doing business very well, where you've got enlightened local government, you've got investment in infrastructure, investment in power that can really help small, medium, large businesses do well.
I'd be interested to hear about the vitality of the communities in the U.S. that you've spoken with, and their enthusiasm about Africa, and how different ones may have advantages in addressing the African market, particularly Atlanta. We've got all these flights to Nigeria that don't happen.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's an important role for the diaspora to play, and as part of the president's doing business in Africa, we'd like to see the diaspora become more engaged in their countries of origin, even if they're American citizens, and in which case, in Nigeria. You know, there are 25,000 Nigerian doctors working in the United States. There's a huge community, a huge wealth of talent. I think that for them to get engaged, not only in business, but in advocating for good governance and in advocating for a frontal assault on corruption, they have a very significant role to play, and we have to figure out how we can best facilitate that engagement.
Something we hear a lot when we're covering Africa is that, at least from African officials and people that have done business there, is that the U.S. is kind of absent in some ways. You know, we had the South African ambassador in town recently, and he said he quoted a song lyric and talking about China. He said, "If you can't be with the one you love, you gotta love the one you're with." You know, he said we'd rather be with the U.S., but he was kind of pushing a little bit and saying y'all aren't here as much as we would like you to be. Is that perception there in Nigeria too?
I think so, and in fact. When I have a conversation with the foreign minister on the power sector, encouraging American companies to get involved, he says, you know, you missed out on sort of the generational jump when Nigeria went, as many African countries did, from landlines to cellular telephones. No American companies were interested in. So you've got South African companies, Emirati, Indian companies that are doing very well. They're making a lot of money. You've got a hugely a market that's expanding significantly in mobile telephones, and American companies missed the boat. I'm pleased to say, however, that with the new initiatives in the power sector, you've got a lot of American interest, and an American company, Symbion Power, just got a contract for a major power generation facility in the South. So I think this time around, American companies are recognizing that they need to be present, and that there are opportunities to grow their businesses. I mentioned that Procter & Gamble is looking to, has just invested $270 million to build a facility outside of Lagos to produce some of their personal hygiene products that they're going to sell in Nigeria and eventually export. So lots of opportunity.
So can you talk a little bit more about the specific products and that kind of thing as lifestyles change and as the economy grows in Nigeria that people are becoming more interested in?
Well, consumer goods, and that's tough because, of course, the Chinese are flooding the market with cheap consumer goods, but planes, trains, automobiles. I mean, there's tremendous interest in U.S. brands, in U.S. supermarkets, for instance. ShopRite, a South African firm, is doing pretty well in Nigeria. I think there are enormous opportunities for U.S. grocery chains, Walmart or Costco. As an example, I think there would be opportunities for franchising in Nigeria as you have a growing middle class that is looking for the things that Americans look for when they're out shopping.
Do a lot of American companies see Nigeria? You mentioned that 1 in 5 sub-Saharan Africans are Nigerian. Are there companies that are looking at Nigeria as a gateway to the broader continent, or do they generally go more to South Africa for that? And are some looking at places like Ghana as an entryway to Nigeria?
Well, I can't speak to Ghana. Yeah, you can ask my counterpart in Accra about that. But I think that there is interest, but Nigeria's got to get its power sector right first. because just as an example, P&G imports some of its product line that it sells in Nigeria from Morocco because it's cheaper to produce in Morocco. Why? Because in Nigeria, with 3,500, 4,500 megawatts of power, you've got most of these production facilities running 24/7 on generators. That costs millions. So if Nigeria can get the power sector right, if they can create a grid where companies can tap into the grid at an affordable rate, I think you'll see companies looking at Nigeria as a jumping-off place for the regional market.
And what's the root of the power issue? Why have they been so far behind in that sector?
I think it all goes back to sort of the rentier state which emerged in the 1970s and 80s as people in government sought to enrich themselves personally in the oil and gas sector. You had a complete collapse of agriculture where Nigeria had significant positions in important commodities in the 1960s. Manufacturing declined because everyone was focused on whatever they could extract from the oil sector. So investments were not made in infrastructure, and successive governments made expansive claims that they were going to fix the power sector, and contracts where billions of naira or dollars were let, and power plants were never built because people stole the money. So this time around, the process, I think, has been handled much better and more transparently. The Bureau of Public Enterprise, which has supervised the privatization of the power sector, has done a good job. We've seen, as I mentioned, concrete results, even American companies getting the contracts for refurbing power generation plants. So there hasn't been a commitment at the highest level of government to fix the power problem. Jonathan has made it his job one. He's done a pretty good job thus far. Let's see if he can continue.
You've been involved with Africa a long time. On this trip, do you notice a different perspective in the U.S. about Africa, about Nigeria generally?
I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding of Africa and African markets. And I think that Nigeria and other African countries still have work to do to kind of repair their brands. That Nigeria's brand as a place where corruption and insecurity reigns needs to be fixed, and that's up to Nigerians. But I do sense in discussions in Houston and New Orleans and here in Atlanta that there is a lot of interest in African markets and the Nigerian market in particular, because I think people recognize that if you really want to grow your business, this is a very exciting emerging market, and maybe we need to be there.
You were at Morehouse. Are you visiting a lot of universities, and do you think that they have an important role in awakening people to opportunities in Africa and vice versa?
Absolutely. I've been to Morehouse. I was at Tulane when I was in New Orleans. I visited the University of Houston when I was in Houston. You've got a sort of the next generation of our leadership. You've got a significant cohort of African students who are studying at these places. So yeah, I think as people learn what Africa is and what Africa isn't, they're going to be more familiar, more comfortable with thinking about service there or working there or investing there.
Just kind of an open statement, what's the best thing that can happen from your visit here? What's your ultimate purpose?
Well, I think it's to begin to raise people's consciousness about Africa in general, but more specifically about Nigeria as a place that has many opportunities. The Doing Business in Africa initiative, the idea is that here's a huge emerging market. We want to try to help you. We want to bring to bear all of the resources of the U.S. government to help you, private sector, grow your businesses in a market that has challenges from security to corruption to rule of law issues, but it's a place where we think you can grow your business, and by growing your business overseas, you're going to be more prosperous at home and create jobs at home and help us, pull together out of this recession.